Join me for a conversation with Russel Bartek from the Venture Forth D&D podcast.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. All right, guys. Yes, this is the podcast where we talk all things Dungeons and Dragons, all things tabletop role-playing games, all things science fiction, fantasy, writing, history, literature, all of that stuff. Actually, including filmmaking. We talk about filmmaking a lot because that is in my background, all with the aim of teaching us how to become better storytellers so we can translate that information to our gaming table, whether we are the game master or whether we are a player. Ooh. All right, I will stop and take a breath. I thank you so much for listening today. I appreciate every single one of you who listens to this podcast. It means the world to me that you would take 45 minutes to an hour and a half to listen to me and my guests each and every week. That is so awesome, guys. If you want to support the podcast even more, you can do so at patreon.com/dicegeeks and learn about some fun goals and that there, and sponsor the podcast at different levels, including just like $1 a month. That may not seem like a lot, but it would go a long way to helping me continue to make these episodes. You can also check out my work at dicegeeks.com. I create resource books that help you have more fun at the gaming table. All right, guys, enough of all that stuff. Here is today's interview. My guest today is the CMO and a cast member for the Venture Forth podcast, Russel Bartek. Russ, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Good to be here.
No, absolutely. It's my pleasure. Why do you love D&D so much, man?
Man, that could be a long description. I will try and keep it somewhat brief, but I think I love D&D for the collaboration, the strategizing, the RP. Those are probably the three things that come to mind. Just being able to jump in a character. I mean, being an actor, I love character development and creating characters and, putting myself in someone else's shoes. So I think, I kind of started that with D&D, with video games, but, D&D just like, you really can just go all out and do whatever you want. And I think that's probably one of the main things is just being able to just do whatever you want.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll dive into some more of that. When was the first time that you played D&D?
So I actually played for the first time at a store that did a weekly D&D night at a card store. They had, I think it was Wednesday nights, they did D&D. And I, for the past 2 years beforehand, I was, listening to it, whether it was podcasts or shows or whatnot. And finally, decided to go in and, sat down. I played a paladin and, typical paladin dwarf, liked the beer. And, just fell in love with it because not necessarily playing it, but just like the group that the people you get together with and are able to kind of just sit down and have fun as a group.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that very fascinating that people are coming into the hobby because of podcasts or YouTube videos or Twitch, plays. So I find that fascinating when I learned that somebody was listening to it or, before they started playing. So that's what happened to you, right?
Yeah. So for a long time, I was just listening to it. And eventually I moved to LA. And once I moved there, I kind of got to the end of a campaign and was like, man, I gotta play it. I can't sit around and wait for another show to listen to or another podcast to listen to, whatever it was. And I just looked it up. I Googled it. I was like, hey, I'm in LA. Like, there's got to be a place to play. And sure enough, I found a game store and went in, and a gentleman helped me make a character. And I came back the next week and started playing. And I still talk to some of those friends that I met at that table that first day. I still play with them and I still talk with them to this day. And that's been, man, 4 years now, something like that. And I still play a bi-weekly game with a few of them. So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then you mentioned a number of things that kind of caught your attention with Dungeons and Dragons, but I think you also mentioned, you said as an actor. So you're an actor?
Yeah. So I'm an actor out in LA, and that's kind of one of the reasons I got into this podcast that we're doing, because I really liked or eventually, at first I started off kind of like in the combat side of it, right? But as time went on with my career in D&D, I was like, you know what? It's really fun to just sit down and think of what a character would do in this situation or why they're acting this way. But yeah, I've been acting out here for a few years now.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I find that interesting as well, because obviously I am not an actor, but I have been acting in role-playing games ever since I was like 9 years old. So,
oh, wow. Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah, it's a very long time. A very, very long time for me to play tabletop RPGs. And of course, my first one was Dungeons and Dragons, and I fell in love with it instantly. But I find that interesting, being able to talk to an actor as well. And of course, we will get into your podcast and all of that stuff in a bit. But I do want to talk, you were, about Dungeons and Dragons and your love for it. And then maybe just a few questions as an actor. I guess what I'm trying to, I'm trying to formulate a question here because, like I said, as a total novice, but as a storyteller, when you pick up a Dungeons and Dragons character as an actor, what are some of the things that you start thinking about if you're going to roll up your dwarf paladin or you're going to create a new character? What are some things that you start thinking about, maybe that you being an actor kind of can inform that process a little bit?
Yeah. So I love that, because it definitely changed over my career playing D&D. At first, when I sat down and I made the paladin, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I could and couldn't do. I had been listening, so I knew some of the rules and how the game worked more or less, but I didn't know what I could get into, right? So my paladin was kind of a bare bones. I think the guy helped me pre-make it almost at the store and printed me out a sheet. But as time went on and I made more and more characters, I started getting more into the backstory first and really fleshing that out, and then kind of diving into what spells I want to take, or what class or what subclass I'd want to be. I think something that really nailed it on the head was actually when we started as a group venture forth, we started doing a clubhouse room, which is like an app that has it's an audio only room that you can invite people into, and we ran the Dungeons and Dragons room on Clubhouse. And one of the things that we did in there was a character creation. So every week we would get together, a few of us from the cast, we would get together and make a room about just creating characters. And we kind of broke it down to bullet points of just how to go through it. And the cool thing is that we based it on the backstory and where this character came from and what your character wants to do and accomplish in life and all this stuff, rather than being oh, you want to be this class because it has this spell and you want to do this because it's meta right now. Instead, we were okay, well, you want to be, an urchin, okay, well, why, how would that work? Oh, you want to be a sailor. Okay, well, let's dive into that. Let's figure out it was interesting because we had a whole this set up and it was a lot of fun. Kind of going from the backstory side of it more, because that's where the character creation, really comes from.
Sure. Absolutely. And just kind of thinking about that a little bit more, when you say backstory, are you talking kind of really elaborate? Or are you talking kind of some general points that you can kind of start building off of?
Yeah, I think it really depends on, how much you want to sit down. And I mean, I think this is also a DM question, when you're creating a world, or you're creating an adventure, how much detail do you put in and how much do you kind of let happen, while you're playing? And I think it really just depends on your preference. But I think for me, I like getting a good start up into the point where I'm now in the party. So where did I grow up? What are my goals? What am I trying to get into? and then maybe a little bit of maybe some bullet points on like personality, like with my character, very optimistic, very has a lot of perseverance, things like that. And I think getting those main things set up is probably the best start, and then you can kind of flesh things out as as the campaign goes, because as the campaign goes, you are going to change your character. Like, I feel like I've never run into someone that has had the same character as soon as they started at session one. Like, you always learn new things about your character, just like you would learn about yourself. And I think that's another really cool reason why D&D is so fun, is because your character changes just like a real person would.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, being an actor as well, do you start thinking about a voice or mannerisms or things like that?
Oh yeah. When I'm for my character, I'm not doing an accent, but another one, and that I play another game, I actually do. And even with this character though, I still have like a higher pitched voice, and just even doing that voice is, I guess the performer in me just like changes my posture, and like I'll be more charismatic with my hand gestures, even though my character has such a low charisma. but yeah, I think that it does really come into the play because you're basically, you are acting when you're doing role playing and stuff, and just because it's improv, it's just because it's a game doesn't mean it's not acting. And I think some of that stuff definitely spills over into the game, just the acting side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just interesting because those are usually kind of what I think of as well. On kind of the backstory or motivations and goals, I think are critical. And then I usually start thinking about a voice or something, or some kind of something to make them a little bit more distinctive than me, like talking at the table, right? Right. So people can know that it's my character and not just, me asking, being able to tell the difference instead of, just by the content of the speech. Like if I ask to, have more Doritos or something, then you'll know it's me, not my character, but, something like that. But,
well, I know that was something that we were trying to make sure, was sorted out for the podcast, because we wanted to make sure everyone's voices, everyone's timbre and way of speaking was different. So, because being an audio only podcast, we wanted to make sure people could differentiate between, who's who. And I think Shane, our creative director, he really did a great job of listening to it and be like, okay, everyone does sound different. Everyone's voices sound great. And we ended up, I think, with a bunch of different voices that you can discern. So when I ask for some Doritos, you'll know it's Flynn.
No, that's awesome. Now, since you said you started playing like 4 years ago, have you mainly played, or have you run games, or have you ever even run a game yet?
Yeah. So mainly I'm a player, but I think I was one of those people that was like, I want to try it. Like, I want to DM. I want to see what it's like. I think I could come up with a cool little one shot or whatever. And so I was lucky enough to be able to sit down and do my first game, like run my first game as a DM with some of my friends that I played with all those years back when I first started playing with that paladin. I was able to meet up with a few of them like 2 years later or something, and sat down and I created a little world off the eastern coast of Faerun called the Savage Isles. And it was my own little, area for me to just play around with. And I had a lot of fun with it. And I'm so grateful for them to be able to sit down and play, because I know that it's very scary for new DMs to get into it if you don't have a group of friends to, play test your style.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And well, the first time I ran a game, it was after, I've told this story on the podcast, but I played D&D for the first time, and then the next day I ran my mom through a dungeon because I was only 9 years old, right? And I started running games for audiences with very low, I guess, social risk, because I was running games for like 9 and 10-year-olds, and we could do whatever we wanted to. So I kind of cut my teeth doing that. But that is really interesting. And I think it's absolutely right what you said. It is important to when you first run. When you run your first game, to have a group who is really kind of into it and ready to, and just ready to play. It's so much fun when, somebody can do that, and I'm thinking too, kind of along those lines, when you were playing, then you ran a little bit, and then now you're mainly a player. Did that experience of being the dungeon master, did that kind of help you, or did it inform your playing afterwards?
So I think, and probably a lot of DMs or GMs could attest to this as well, but after playing a few times for the first time, like DMing, like running a game a few times, I definitely had a lot more respect for the dungeon master. Just, sitting down, luckily, again, they were my friends, but I made mistakes. Like I messed up a call or whatever. And because they were my buddies, they were able to be like, hey, no worries. We know that you're figuring it out. And I think because of that, I was able to see like, oh, okay, they have a lot on their plate that they're dealing with. So maybe give them some slack when, the things are taking a little bit longer, or they mess up a roll. And not to say that I was like angry about it or anything, but it was just seeing that other side of it, seeing that other perspective. Was really eye-opening, and definitely changed the way I play. I'm way more, laid back than I was when I first started.
Yeah, no, that's really good to hear, because I always try to encourage people, because I know some people, maybe, being the dungeon master, the game master really isn't their thing. But I always encourage people to at least run some one shots every once in a while, or get a little experience at it, because I think it does really just open your eyes to what your game master is doing, like, and how much, how many decisions they have to make, right. and how they're trying to get the story to progress. And it just opens up to me, I know, as a player, just to think, oh, right. If this dungeon master has given out 3 plot hooks or story hooks, maybe I should take one of those and run with it. And, instead of just, saying, I want to like, lay around in my underground lair or something and not do anything. Maybe we're supposed to engage with, some things that the dungeon master is giving us or whatever. But so I really think that is awesome, because and anybody listening, if you're just, mainly a player, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just every once in a while, try your hand at at being the dungeon master and just see how it goes, because I think you'll learn a lot. And I know I'm a better player because I have run so many games,
Yeah. And I think another thing on top of that is it's not as hard as you think. It's only as hard as you make it. And really, it could be as simple as just having a D20, rolling it. You don't have to plan as much as you think you do. I think that's another big thing that I learned from the first game that I ever ran to games that I've run now. You really don't have to plan much. Your party will basically do stuff, and it'll end up being, the plan, right? Yeah. They'll make the plan. They'll make the one shot. You just have to come up with like the skeleton, and then after a few games, you'll get used to the improv, because it's improv still, but it's very different from like playing a character in improv. It's trying to plan ahead, but it's very self-explanatory once you get it once or twice.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I think while I'm a big advocate of game masters and dungeon masters of just taking a lot of pressure off of themselves, right?
Yes.
Because it is. not their sole responsibility that everybody is having fun at the table. It's the players, it's everybody at the table responsibility.
It's a collective thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I am all for that. And of course, I wrote a little book called The No Prep GM, where I talk about some of my tips and strategies on running games with like zero or low prep. Because sometimes, because sometimes life just doesn't allow you time. When I was 17, I could spend 20 hours, working on a campaign or something, but, with a family and tons of other responsibilities, this is not going to happen sometimes. Right. And so we get caught up sometimes in the, the session starts in 15 minutes and I haven't even been able to think about it yet. And I try to give people strategies and tips to help them prepare for those moments in a certain way of not preparing. I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, just having some strategies and tips ready to go when you get down kind of there. Now you have mentioned, and I think it is interesting since you're an actor, you have mentioned improv a few times. And I think this can be kind of a big issue for people. A lot of people are coming into tabletop role-playing games. We love them. We play them and stuff, but, obviously we've never had, most people have never had an acting class or anything like that, right. Or even, would consider, acting, but then they're acting every Tuesday night, playing D&D or whatever.
Yeah.
Improv. What is there maybe some insights you can give non-actors by talking about improv?
Well, I think the obvious one would just be yes-anding. And I guess maybe a good thing is to dive into that because I think a lot of people misinterpret it as just like always agree. Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily mean always agree. It means just go with it, if that makes sense. And like let's say you want to disagree with someone, but you want to keep it, like you could continue and be negative. Like you can say no, but not just like stop and then go on to something else. Mm-hmm. Maybe it engages in a conversation of you and the other player having an altercation. Like maybe you guys gonna do a fight, or maybe you storm off and it's your character. It doesn't always mean saying yes, let's do what you say. It just means playing off of the other person. And I think that's something that's a real basic start. Is just like, hey, if someone's starting something, try and think of a way where you can continue that idea rather than trying to shut it down. And I think that's like a general premise of like what yes standing means, instead of just saying yes to everything. And hopefully that helps.
Yeah. And I think that is kind of an interesting concept that it took me a while to kind of think about this as well. So somebody asks you a question, and I'll frame it a little bit. So a player asks the DM a question and they say, I'm going to do it bad, but they ask a question. If I come up with an example, it'll be terrible. But if they ask a question, the dungeon master can say yes, and this other thing, right? And they'll add something in. So a player says, can I don't know, I'm going to do it really bad, but, can I see the guard on top of the tower? And, do I just give in to them? When I just say yes, or how would I be like, well, maybe you can't see the guards on the tower. How would I do yes and without just shutting them down? Because the worst thing I will agree is just to shut your players down and just be like, no, you can't do that. That's like one of the worst things you can do. So how would you say, like, there's a tower, can we see the guard on top? What would you say would be a good example of yes and maybe in that situation?
Well, I mean, I'm assuming it would go with like a rule, like you would have them do a perception check or something. But let's say that like maybe the roll was low. Maybe it would be like, instead of saying no, you don't see anyone, it could be something like you see like a light like moving around, but you can't tell if it's like a torchlight or if it's being held by someone, or maybe if it's a cold day out, maybe it's you see like steam rising from the top of the tower, but you can't tell if it's a breath or if it's just like coming from the chimney. You're not sure, but you know that you can kind of see something, but you're not sure if it's a guard, or maybe if you're trying to find out how many guards there are, it could be something like, oh, you can kind of see the helmet of one, but you can't tell if that's all that's up there, right? Using different, I guess, items or objects or senses, instead of just seeing it, maybe you hear something up there like a clang or a squeak, but you don't know. It doesn't narrow it down to exactly what the player's looking for, but it gives them an idea. I think that kind of comes into like rolling and failing. And I've seen other DMs do this, which I love, when it's like, if someone doesn't meet the check, maybe you give them a little bit, but you don't give them everything. You don't give them the answer, but you give them like a breadcrumb. And I think that's a really cool way of yes-anding, is like, how you didn't meet the check, but you were thinking about it. And like, you want to look up there and see if there's someone on the tower. So you as a player are doing a good thing, right? You're being perceptive, and you're understanding what you're trying to do, and you're coming up with a cool idea. So I want to reward you with that, even though you failed to check. And I think doing little breadcrumbs like that is very helpful. And it's also kind of like yes-anding in that way.
Yeah. And sorry to put you on the spot there with my poor example, but
no, I love it. No, it's great.
Yeah. And I do think too. So, I mean, I think there is kind of a place for maybe saying no, but I think you can get by with no if you add the but behind it, right? If you and sometimes that can be kind of just as simple as something like, is the door unlocked? And you say no, but you see some scratch marks around the lock or around the floor next to something, or you say, is there anything in this room? This is the one I hate, actually, right? It's like, is there anything in this room? No. I hate that as a game master, as a dungeon master.
Yeah, I feel that.
So that's why I've also created books and books and books of random tables to fill those rooms with things that won't enrich your players, and they won't, unbalance the game or, give a luck blade to a second level character or something, but they'll give something so you just don't have to say no, even if it's a dead rat or a piece of wood or something, just, so if somebody says, hey, is there anything in that room? And I'm going to say no, I may just say no, but you do notice some stuff in the corner, and let's roll on a random table, or you do see some, scratches around one of the bricks in the wall, and you're like, maybe I can take that out, and there'll be something back there. Then that just,
Sorry, I just had an idea like that led me into this, and I wanted to mention, because like it kind of plays back to the very beginning of what your first question you asked me is like, why I love D&D and like why I got into it. It's like, because you could put something in that room, like a dead rat or a piece of parchment with some writing they don't understand on, and you can just throw it at them, right? And then they'll make their own story out of that, right? Because then it's like, oh, well, what does this writing say? Like, does it mean something? Should we get it checked out? Maybe the wizard sits down and casts comprehend languages later on in next session or 2 sessions from now. Maybe they go get it translated by the local temple or the local wizard's library, and then that could turn into a whole arc for your campaign just because you threw something random into a room. And I think that's something that's so cool about this game that we play, is that just something small like that you didn't just say no, there's nothing in the room. You gave them a little crumb, and that turned into something, right? And I think that's another cool thing with D&D is like, don't expect to like follow the path that you laid out for your players. And I think you should encourage, or not encourage, but just like allow for players to veer off of that path and find a side quest or change the destiny that you had planned for them, because that makes it feel like a living and breathing world. And I think that's another really cool reason why people play D&D, because it feels real if you do it like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense. I don't know. That might make no sense.
Oh, no. And it absolutely makes sense. Well, I mean, that's really some of the stuff that I talk about when I talk about no prep game mastering, is that I can use a random table to put out to give the characters story hooks right at the beginning. If and like I've really tried to reduce my stress of running games to as low as possible. Like I could take several people, say, what are your characters? And I could start running a game like right now, right? And I'm not going to worry about it, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out a random table and I'm going to roll up and I'm going to say, as you're, maybe I think of something like, oh, okay, you're traveling down the road and you see a gold coin on the ground and it has an X, like the head of the king has been X'd out, like somebody scratched it out. And my players all of a sudden go, whoa, what does that mean? Does somebody want the king dead? Maybe somebody wants the king dead. And then I'm like, oh, they do now, right? Like in my head, right? I'm like, oh, well, somebody does now. Like I just got that off a random table, but now, okay, you're going to try to stop the assassination of the king, or you're going to participate? Like what, I don't know, but like, you just give them that little thing, or like you said, a parchment with writing on it. That's always, I think, one of the best things, or a ring with initials on it. Players usually will jump on that and they'll say, oh man, we found just this simple iron ring, but it has CRG, etched into it. What does that mean? Let's figure it out, right? And you can just build off a whole adventure on something like that. And I think you're right on with why do people love D&D, and when you're kind of doing it in that way, it just feels so organic, and it feels it's not like, it has elements of a TV show or a movie or a book, but it's more alive, right? Because you can just kind of breathe into it, and the whole story just changes, right? And it just goes in some other place, and your dark fantasy urban city campaign, all of a sudden the characters are off in the wilderness, exploring the mountains to find some clue to who that iron ring belongs to, right? And it's just it just totally changes, and I think that's awesome, and I think that's it keeps it alive for people.
Exactly. And it also, I mean, even if that like ring that says, what was it, CRG on it, even if it doesn't lead to anything like a long quest story, it could just lead to like, maybe you find out that it's a widow's husband's ring that they lost long ago, and he had passed, and she's grateful for you for returning it, and it could be something small like that, just like little tiny things. And those little tiny things make the world feel alive, because there's things going on in the world that you can notice and see and interact with. And just little things like that will make the world feel like open and interesting, and that will also immerse the characters into the game that you're telling them, or telling for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, right, that the old widow then, right before returning the ring, the old widow says, oh, wait a second. And she opens up her cupboard and pulls out the +2 dagger that her husband used to use, and she hands it to the rogue of the party or something. And you're just like, well, that was awesome, right? Like that's incredible. That is just a great story arc, and it felt real and it felt good. And it was, a more creative way to get the players kind of just like, sucked in and involved in the story, and then reward them for following some of those little tangents. And also, I mean, I think there's also a plus to having little threads and things that aren't tied up. So when you get to your end of your campaign, there can always be that player, when you're retiring the characters and you're saying, okay, our campaign's done, we're going to move on. This other person's going to run a game. This was awesome. We had a great, year, 2 years playing these characters. There could always be that player who says, hey, that ring we found in session 13, my character is going to try to find out whose that is, and they're gonna go off, and that's like after the campaign, but they've got another thing, and that's what they're their character is doing even after the campaign is over. And I think leaving people some of those things, like the looks around the table would just be like, oh yeah, you remember the ring. And as a
callbacks are always so awesome.
Oh yeah. And so I think, as a dungeon master, I would just be like, oh my gosh, you remembered that ring from session 13. That's awesome.
Oh, that makes dungeon masters feel so good when you bring something up in a lore that like they thought none of the players were listening to. It's like, oh, you care, you listen.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a little double-edged sword sometimes, because I do love it when they pull something out and that I gave them. But sometimes I think it's happened to me a couple times where I've forgotten the thing. And I'm like, oh, this huge big thing is here. And how are you going to deal with that? And one of the players is like, oh, I drink that special potion we got in session 7. And you're just like, what? Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
It's like, God, crap. Well, there you go. You win.
Yeah, you won. So we'll go to a new dungeon because you figured this one out. Or whatever. No, that's awesome. Well, also, Russell, I definitely want to talk about your podcast, because you mentioned it a few times. And, I mentioned that you were a cast member of a podcast and that. So why don't you tell us about Venture Forth a little bit?
Oh boy. Where to beginning? Let's see. So Venture Forth is a D&D podcast. And I think the thing that makes us stand out a little bit is that we really want to focus on the story side of D&D. We want to tell a story, because we know that there's not a lot of people out there, or there are a lot of people out there that don't understand D&D and how it works. Right. And we want to be able to, tell a story for everyone to listen to. So we focus on being immersive and playing in character and trying to decide as best we can in character, instead of doing, me talking to a player. I'm talking to Alma, or I'm talking to Shreya, or I'm talking to Kellic, and I'm talking to that character as Flynn instead of asking him something out of character. And I think that's the thing that kind of is making us stand out a little bit, is we just want to tell a story, and the dice are just helping us decide if we succeed or fail, or how good or bad we do at something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, sadly, I haven't got to listen to much, but I did listen to a bit. And I have to say the production value is very high. And I assume you are all actors, because you do voices very well.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's a tip of the hat to Shane for the production value. He's done a very good job of the quality of the audio and the editing. That he does all that himself, which is insane. And I always, tip my hat to him, because he does a bang up job of getting all these in order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe we could dive in a bit. Of course, it's a D&D podcast, but why don't we dive in a little bit and give people some sense of what you guys are playing? Is it Forgotten Realms, or is it your own world?
Oh yeah. So our DM Ethan came up with his own homebrew world. It's called the World of Elbor, and basically the whole campaign is based off of a holy war. And the term that he's always said that has been ingrained in my head is the old gods are dead and the new ones are not doing a good job. And that's basically what the premise of the World of Elbor is right now. We're in the midst of this holy war, trying to figure out who's good and who's bad, if there are good and bad people, and the morality and the different perspectives of war and adventuring, and just trying to like all balled up into one party.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, that sounds really interesting. And then what about, players, how many players, how big's your cast?
Yeah. So we have a 4-person party currently. And it's been a lot of fun. I think everyone brings something to the table. We have a character who is kind of a dad almost now. I think a little bit with a little bit of sternness and seriousness. And we also have a young girl, a young human girl who's very she knows the way and she's always right. As little girls tend to do. We also have almost from a different world, this bird creature who is very wise and studious and still trying to understand the world, but still seems to be more wise than anyone in the party. And then my character is a very optimistic and like fun-loving character who just wants to go out and see the world and adventure, and kind of make his own story, because he was basically sat around hearing everyone else's for a long time.
All right, well, let's maybe dive into your character a little bit.
Sure.
I assume, since what we talked about earlier, it kind of started with the background, so maybe give us a little backstory, and then what race and class, and
Sure. So I'm playing a halfling who, without any big spoilers, kind of grew up learning about the adventurers, and just like knowing that they go off and do amazing things, and kind of, for a lack of a better term, was kind of stuck and cooped up, and wanted to go adventure. And from an accident or two, found a way to join a group that would lead to becoming an adventurer called the Iron Light Collective, which is a group of monster hunters that roam across the world somewhat in secret, taking care of monsters that are harming the innocent. And so he went and is on his path to becoming a sentinel, which is the rank of a Iron Light. Once you have finished training, you become a sentinel in the Iron Light Collective, and you are respected. And he's basically just trying his best to succeed at that, because he is smaller than the normal member of that collective. It's causing some problems, but he's trying his best to prove that he can do it, even though he's not as big as everyone else. And I think that's a story that probably resonates with a lot of people, feeling like you're underestimated or you're the underdog. And it's kind of one of those stories where it's like, hey, I can do it. Just because I'm not the norm, I can still do it. But leading off of that, so that's the backstory that I kind of trailed off on a little bit. He's an Eldritch Knight fighter.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, there's a little bit of magic that he's learning from the collective, the fighting style and the action surge and the second wind. Love it. But that's Flynn Fellowweave. That's my little halfling fighter that I play. And if you want to hear more about him, definitely check out the podcast.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So, obviously, you said you've fallen in love with Dungeons and Dragons, and now we're talking about your podcast. What kind of, what kind of demon from the nine hells possessed you all to do a D&D podcast?
Oh, geez. Well, I think we just liked playing the game and wanted to tell a story. I mean, I know that's probably what I've been saying for a while, and it's kind of beating a dead horse at this point. We really wanted to tell a good story. And I think we've watched a lot of podcasts, listened to a lot of shows. And while there are a lot of great stories out there, we wanted to kind of do a twist on it where, we're trying not to have a lot of banter. We're trying not to, constantly be going back and forth and doing a bunch of jokes that don't relate to the story. We kind of want to focus on almost like you're listening to a movie or a series or something like that, where you're just listening to these characters find their way through this world and come up with their own tales and stories. And I think in doing that, we wanted to record it and share it with people, because we felt like we had some good ideas and some cool stories to tell.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. And then maybe how many episodes do you have? Are you going to do multiple campaigns, or how's of the structure work? Yeah.
I mean, another campaign, I haven't even thought about it yet. And I've been knocked unconscious a good few times as Flynn. And never have I once thought what am I going to play next campaign? I'm just so ingrained in this character and just entranced by this group that we have set up, and everyone's backstories. And I think more than recently, we're around we just released episode 46, I believe. And we record a few episodes in advance just so we have buffering. But we're around the 50 mark. So we're getting to that big 50. And it's been very exciting. And it's also getting to that point where we're starting to see a lot of the characters' backstories come out. You know, I don't want to spoil anything, but I'm not going to say it. But we are starting to see some more story take place, and it's been really cool because you know, we're getting there. We're getting to that point where it's like, oh no, then it's getting juicy. You know, now we're starting to get backstory. We're starting to get details. We're starting to meet new NPCs and characters from other people's backstories, and it's very exciting. So yeah, we are on episode 46 right now, and every week we're releasing them. We're gonna go. I think Ethan's planned for this to be like a get up to level 20 campaign, if I remember correctly. But so it's gonna go ahead.
And what level are you now?
Currently, we're level 7.
Oh, so wow!
We have a ways to go. We have a lot of story to tell.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. That sounds really awesome too. I think sometimes we can. I know I can derail my home game with too much banter, right? So I think that's it's interesting, and that usually happens with people who are somewhat involved in the banter. I think sometimes it can be a little jarring to hear too much banter between the players themselves. Banter between the characters is a totally different story.
Yeah, like once you're bantering between players, sometimes you get lost in that instead of what was going on in the game, and you kind of get especially if you're a listener, like if you go on with some banter too long, you kind of get knocked out of the story, right? And we still are a group of friends that sit around and love playing D&D, so there is still some banter. It's not like we're very strict on it, but we do try and tend to, if we have a question, we try our best to ask it in character. And I think that's something that sets us apart from a lot of the other podcasts, is that we really try and answer questions and ask them in character, because it makes it more fluid and it keeps you in character and it keeps you, the listener, in the story and immersed in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find your podcast, and how can they listen?
Of course. So yes, you can find it anywhere podcasts are, or distributed. So basically so Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, all that stuff. We also have a YouTube channel where we have not only the episodes, but we also have spotlights, which are like the highlights of every episode. There's a little highlighted. They're about 10 or so minutes. So if you wanted to kind of catch cool moments from the episodes, you can listen to those. Also on our YouTube channel is some music. So we have a few music tracks that we released that are our music tracks that we actually use on the podcast. So they're hour-long clips of music, and you can kind of use them in your games if you want to. Also, the biggest thing that I love the YouTube channel for, and I also love Shane for, is that he came up with Harken Back, which is a recap. That's like a half an hour, like 20, 30-minute episode, and it recaps 10 episode increments. So if you listen to a little bit of it and you're like, oh, this is interesting, but I don't want to catch up to 40 episodes. That's a lot. You can go onto our YouTube channel and listen to Harken Back, which is like a half an hour. You get caught up really quick, and it's really cool because he not only puts clips of the episodes in, but he also narrates it. So he walks you through what's going on in the main story and kind of uses clips from the episodes to kind of give you an idea of what's been going on. So I think that's one of the biggest things to check out if you're interested in the podcast and you want to catch up quick, because we have some cool stuff coming up. But I want to keep them under wraps for now. But if you want to get caught up, that's a really good way to do it.
Yeah, that sounds great. And of course, the podcast is called Venture Forth, and I will be sure to put links in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who's listening right now can head over there and you will be able to listen to Venture Forth. Well, Russel, it has been a pleasure having you on the show today. It was really fun talking to you, getting your perspective on being an actor and hearing some awesome stuff that's going on in Dungeons and Dragons. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, man. This was a lot of fun. I always love talking about D&D, and it's great to talk to someone who cares about it as much as I do.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Russel today. As I mentioned in the show, I have provided links in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. You can head over there right now and click on those links so you can learn more about the Venture Forth podcast. And I would greatly encourage you to do that. All right. If you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free free. You'll get 20 free dungeon maps. You'll get a custom D&D 5e character background, plus some other little PDFs. You'll also never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in the world of Dice Geeks. All right, guys, I really appreciate you listening to the show each and every week. Like I said at the top, it is always a pleasure to know that people are listening to these interviews, and I hope you are learning how to become a better game master and a better role player. So, until next Wednesday, keep gaming!